Greetings all participants and welcome to the 11th CMKL special talk. You may notice that you are seeing a new face here. So let me introduce myself. My name is Sasit Imarunrak, or you can call me Gong. I am the Student Activities Coordinator here at CMKL University, and it is a pleasure to meet you all. I will be the moderator of this session for today. Let me explain about our special talk series. CMKL Special Talk is an event that brings talented and distinguished speakers together to talk about a series of facts and interesting topics from different points of view. Today, we have come to the 11th episode of CMKL Special Talk under the topic of mobile sensing approaches to acquiring traffic information. And we are here with our speaker for today, Professor Dr. Sooksan Panichpapiboon. He is an adjunct faculty member of CMKL University, Thailand, from the Faculty of Information Technology at King Mongkut Institute of Technology, Ladkrabang, Thailand. He has a Ph.D. in electrical and computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon University, United States of America. And now, the time has come. Let us give a big round of applause to Professor Dr. Sooksan Panichpapiboon.
Thanks. Okay. All right. So, should I start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Let me share the screen then. Okay. So, right. Okay. All right. Let's get started then. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the talk. My name is Sooksan and it's a pleasure to be here. So in this presentation, we will be talking about how you can use off-the-shelf mobile devices, such as your smartphones, to turn any vehicle into a mobile traffic sensor. Okay. And here's the outline of the talk. So basically, we will look at how the traffic information is collected in the current system with the fixed sensing approach. And then we will also discuss ideas on how to collect the same information with a mobile sensing approach. And most of the work that I am presenting in this talk is done together with my PhD student, Putipong. Okay. All right. So what is the traffic information, right? Well, the traffic information is the information that tells us something about the characteristic of the road network, right? And basically, there are two levels of traffic information. The first one is called a macroscopic level. And the information at this level would describe the characteristic of the traffic stream as a whole, as opposed to that of each individual vehicle. Okay, so we are looking at the stream as a whole here. And there are three fundamental traffic information at this level, which are speed. Of course, this would be the average speed, and we have flow and density. And we will talk more about this traffic information later on in the presentation. And we also have another level of traffic information, which is the microscopic level. And the traffic information at this level would describe the characteristic of an individual vehicle. An example of this kind of traffic information would be the individual driving pattern or the maneuvering activity of the driver. For example, is he making a left turn? Is he changing a lane? Or is he making a U-turn? Things like this. Okay. And so in this presentation, we will talk about how you can acquire these two levels of traffic information with the mobile traffic sensors. Okay. Okay, so why do we care about the traffic information, right? Well, the traffic information is beneficial to us in many ways. So first, we can use it for decision support, right? For example, we can use it for route planning and route selection. And actually, we are kind of doing this on a daily basis, right? So for example, before we leave our house for work in the morning, right? The first thing we do is we turn on the application and see how bad the traffic is today, right? And then we kind of sort of try to figure out the best way to get from our house to the workplace, right? So, and this would, of course, require the traffic information. And also the traffic information is important for modeling. So for example, a traffic simulator would definitely need the real traffic information so that it can simulate things that reflect the real world scenario, right? And finally, the traffic information can help us design and regulate the traffic better, right? So for example, if you want to, let's say, solve a congestion problem, then the first thing that you need to do is to look at the historical traffic information, right? So that you can figure out what is the source of the problem, and then you can come up with a solution to solve it, right? So these are the reasons why the traffic information is very important. Okay, and here is the typical process in acquiring the traffic information. So it consists of 3 steps. So the first step is data collection or sensing. So in this step, the raw traffic data would be collected by the sensors, and the sensors could be fixed sensors or mobile sensors. Okay, and once you've got the raw traffic data, the next step is to process them, right, and to turn them into the traffic information. So in the second step, which is data processing, this would involve coming up with algorithms to process the raw traffic data and turn them into traffic information, right? And once you have got the meaningful traffic information, then you need to disseminate them back to the users, right? So in the last step or the third step, this would involve coming up with methods to disseminate the traffic information back to the user, okay? But in this presentation, we will mainly focus on the first 2 steps, right? Data collection or sensing and information estimation, okay? Okay, so now let's look at the typical traffic information system. So currently, many cities have their own traffic information systems, and they typically look like what is shown in this picture here. So the system typically consists of 3 main components, which are the sensors, the data collection center, and the information outlet. Okay, so basically the sensors are going to collect the raw traffic data, right? And then this data will be passed to the data collection center for processing. And once the data are processed into information, this would be disseminated back to the users. For example, maybe through a website or through a social media, right? Or maybe the navigation applications, right? So these are a few ways to disseminate the information. And the sensors in the current system are typically fixed sensors. So you would have to install them along the road. Okay, and the typical sensors are the loop detectors and the cameras. And we see the traffic cameras everywhere these days, right? So this is how the typical system works. It works fine, but there are some limitations, right? So first, it takes a lot of time and efforts to install these sensors, right? And in some cases, you need to dig up the road surface to install the sensors. So it's not very convenient, right? And second, maintenance of this large number of sensors is also troublesome, right? Just imagine a scenario where you have to maintain, let's say, 10,000 or 20,000 of these sensors. It would be quite troublesome, right? And also in a fixed sensing system, you also have a limited coverage, right? In the area or on the road where you do not install the sensors, you cannot collect the data from those areas, right? So you have a limited coverage. And of course, it would be very expensive to try to blanket a large area with the fixed sensors. So for example, if you want to provide a citywide or a statewide coverage, then you have to have a big budget for this, right? So the question is, how can we make things better, right? How can we do things better than this? Well, a better solution would be to use the vehicles as mobile sensors and let them collect the traffic data as they travel, right? Why not, right? Because they are on the road anyway, right? And in this model, some vehicles will be equipped with sensors and communication devices, and they can pass the collected data to the data collection center for processing. And this approach has many advantages over the fixed sensing system. So first, in this case, you do not have to install the fixed sensors on the road, right? So this would save a lot of time and effort. And of course, the maintenance is much easier in this case, right? Because the sensors are now on the vehicles, right? So it is easy to maintain. And most importantly, since the vehicles can travel anywhere in the road network, right? So the data can be collected from everywhere in the network, right? So how can we make this system happen, right? One of the promising technology which can enable the concept of mobile traffic sensing is the mobile cellular devices, or the smartphones. And modern smartphones are now equipped with a variety of sophisticated built-in sensors, such as GPS, accelerometer, gyroscope, microphone, camera, right? You name it, right? And these sensors could be exploited to collect the traffic data, right? And one of the greatest advantages of using the smartphones for traffic sensing is that they are now adopted by a large number of users. So basically, everyone has got a smartphone, right? So without having to buy any new equipment, any person can turn any vehicle, whether it's new or old, right, into a mobile traffic sensor. So this would be an excellent way to transform millions of ordinary vehicles into traffic sensors, right? Which is pretty neat, I think. All right, but using vehicles as traffic sensors brings many new challenges. So first, the sensors are now mobile and distributed, right? So they might not always be in a specific location, right, at a specific time, right? And second, the traffic variables or traffic data that used to be collectible easily with the fixed sensors might not be easily obtained with the mobile sensors. So in this case, we need to think about new ways to collect this traffic data, and we'll talk about this, okay? And since the type of the collected data is now different from the fixed sensing approach, then we need to come up with new algorithms for processing them, okay? Now let's look at how the traffic data or the traffic variables can be collected, okay? So we'll first look at the macroscopic traffic variables, which are the speed, density, and flow, okay? So let's see what they are, right? So speed measures how fast the vehicles move. So it has a unit of meter per second, right? So I think everyone is familiar with the speed, right? And density measures how packed the vehicles are on the road. So it is essentially the number of vehicles per unit length of the road, and it has a unit of vehicle per meter. And finally, the flow measures the number of vehicles that passes through an observation point per unit of time, and it has a unit of vehicle per second. And so these are the three fundamental traffic variables at the macroscopic level. And they are related through what is called the fundamental relation, which is given in the equation here, which is very simple, okay? So flow is equal to density times the speed. And you can check that the units also match, right? So flow, which is given in vehicle per second, is equal to density, which is given in vehicle per meter, times the speed, which is given in meter per second. Right? And so in the rest of the presentation, I will be showing you how these variables are traditionally obtained with the fixed sensors, and then I will discuss how they can be obtained with the mobile sensors. Right? Okay, so first let's take a look at how the speed is obtained with the fixed sensors. All right, so one of the most widely used fixed sensors is the loop detectors, and they have been around since the 1960s. And currently, there are probably more than 40,000 loop detectors on the California highway system. So they are still popularly used. And This picture shows an example of the loop detectors. You can see them on the ground where the arrows are pointing. Can you see that? So these are the loop detectors. And here's how they work. Okay. So basically, you would implant the loop detectors on the road surface. And when a vehicle passes on top of the loop detector, it will change the inductance of the loop. Okay. So in this way, the loop detector would be able to detect the presence of the vehicle, right? And essentially, you can use it to count the number of vehicles that passes through the loop detector, right? And if you count it over time, then you will be able to get the flow rate, right, automatically. And in addition to the count, you can also obtain the occupancy time of each vehicle. The occupancy time is the time that each vehicle stays on top of the loop, okay? And this is also important. So with the loop detectors, you can obtain the count and also the occupancy time automatically, okay? Now the question is, how can we detect the speed with the loop detectors, right? It is actually very simple. So what you can do is you can set up the two loop detectors and you can separate them by some distance, let's say d. And so what you can do to detect the speed of the vehicle is this. So first you can check the timestamp of the time that the vehicle passes the first detector, and also you can check the time that the vehicle passes the second detector, right? So the speed in this case would be the distance between the detector, d, right, divided by the time difference. So that's pretty easy to obtain, right? And in a later traffic information system, fixed cameras are also popularly used, right? And with the fixed camera, you can also obtain the speed by tracking the change in the vehicle position over multiple video frames, right? So the speed in this case would be the change distance over the time between the video frames, right? So this is also pretty easy to obtain from the camera, right? So with the fixed sensors, the speed can be obtained pretty easy, right? Now let's look at how the speed can be obtained with the mobile sensors. Well, it turns out that it is also quite easy to obtain the speed with the mobile sensors. And the most convenient solution is to use a GPS receiver, right? So basically, what you can do is you can equip the vehicle with a smartphone, right? And we'll call it mobile sensor. So each mobile sensor will periodically send its location to the data collection center, right? And the data collection center can extract the speed of each sensor by tracking its position over time, right? So that will give you the speed. And this solution is used in many traffic applications, including Google Maps, right? So this is a very simple and convenient solution, but it also comes with a heavy price, right? Which is the power. So if you have ever used one of these applications like Google Maps or other navigation apps, right? You will notice that it drains out the battery of your phone pretty quickly, right? And the reason is that GPS is a power-hungry sensor, so it is going to consume a lot of power from your phone when you use it, right? And here's the power consumption chart of the built-in sensors on the phone. And you can see that GPS has the second highest power consumption rate. So the question is there any other way to obtain the average speed from the mobile sensor that is more energy efficient than using the GPS, right? And according to this chart, we see that the accelerometer consumes about 6 times less energy than the GPS, right? So this has got us thinking, well, would it be a good idea, right, to try to estimate the speed from the accelerometer because it consumes a lot less power, right? And an accelerometer is a sensor which measures the acceleration on the 3 axes of the phone. So basically, you can think of it as a motion sensor. So it will be able to detect the motion of the phone, right? So for example, when you change the orientation of the phone or when you shake it, things like this could be detected by the accelerometer, okay? So So how can we use the accelerometer to estimate the average speed of the vehicle, right? So here's the idea. Well, we observed that if the vehicle is able to move continuously for a long time without, let's say, any interruption, then in this case, the average speed of the vehicle will be high, right? So for example, if you are driving in a non-congested road, right, without having to stop frequently, then in this case, your average speed would be high, right? But on the other hand, if you are driving in a congested road and you have to stop very often, right? So you move a little and then you stop, and you move a little and you stop again, right? So in this case, your average speed would be, of course, low, right? And based on this observation, we can use the accelerometer to detect the state of the vehicle, whether it is stopping or whether it is moving, right? And then we can use this pattern of stop and go to guess the average speed of the vehicle, right? So that's the idea. And here's how it is going to work in practice. So you can place your smartphone in the car, and the accelerometer will detect the state of the vehicle, whether it is moving or whether it is stopping, right? And then the stop and go pattern will be uploaded to the data collection center periodically, for example, maybe every 5 minutes. And then the data collection center can run an algorithm to estimate the speed based on the pattern of stop and go, right? So this is the main idea of how this is going to work. I do not have time to go into the details of the algorithm, but if you are interested to learn more, you can check out our journal paper, which is given at the bottom of the screen here. Okay, so now we learned that we can also obtain the speed, right, from the mobile sensors. The most convenient way is to use GPS, but it will consume a lot of power from your phone. And an alternative solution is to use the accelerometer. Okay, that is also doable. All right. Now let's look at the next traffic variable, which is the density. Again, the density measures how packed the vehicles are on the road, right? And let's see how it could be obtained with the fixed sensor first. Okay. Oh, density measurement has actually been studied since the 1920s. That is what, about 100 years ago, right? 1920s. That's pretty amazing. And the most direct way to obtain density is through an aerial photograph. So basically, what you would do is you would take a bird's eye view photo of the road section, right? And then you would count the number of vehicles that are on the section. And then if you divide that number by the length of the road, then you can determine the density, right? So that is the most direct way to obtain density. But obtaining the aerial photo is not quite convenient to do, right? So in the 1960s, when the loop detectors become available, the traffic density is then usually derived indirectly from the data obtained from the loop detectors. And there are three major ways to estimate the density from the loop detector. Okay, so the first method is to use the speed and flow relation. The second method is to use the occupancy time, and the third method is to use what is called the input-output count. So let's see how these methods work. So in the first method, we are going to determine the density from the speed and flow relation. Okay, so with the loop detectors, you can obtain the speed and flow, right? Just like what we discussed before, right? And you can use the speed and flow that you have to estimate the density. Remember that these quantities are related through the fundamental relation, right? So flow is equal to density times the speed. And in this case, with the loop detectors, you can detect the speed and the flow, right? So you have two variables out of three, right? So you can use this equation to get the third one, right? So that's how you do it in the first method, to use the fundamental relation to figure out the density. And in the second method, in this case, you are going to use the occupancy time to estimate the density. Well, the occupancy time on the loop detector is the duration that each vehicle stays on top of the loop, okay? And you can use it to infer the density, right? So intuitively, if a loop detector or actually the space on the road, right, is occupied for a large percentage of time, then it implies that the traffic is dense, right? For example, if the detector is occupied, let's say 100% of the time, then in this case, it means that the traffic is at its full capacity, right? It is fully dense. But on the other hand, if the detector is occupied 0% of the time, then in this case, you have zero density, right? So in this case, actually, there's no traffic at all, right? Because there's no vehicle to stay on top of the loop, right? So in this approach, you can use the occupancy time to infer how dense the traffic is, right? And the third way to estimate the density from the loop detectors is called the input-output count. And so the goal of this method is to count how many vehicles are there on the road section. And here's how it's going to work. Okay, so what you can do is you can place a set of detectors at the entrance of the section, and you can place another set of detectors at the exit of the section, right? And what you are going to do is you are going to keep track of the number of vehicles that has entered the section and the numbers of vehicles that has exited the section, right? And by subtracting these two numbers, you will be able to get the number of vehicles that still remain on the section, right? And you divide this number by the length of the section, then you get the density, right? So this is how you obtain the density from the loop detector, right? And with a fixed camera, the density can also be obtained quite conveniently. In this case, you can run maybe an image processing algorithm or a machine learning algorithm to detect the vehicles in the camera scene, right? And then you can count them and divide the number by the length of the space, then you get the density, right? So these are the ways to obtain the density with the fixed sensors, okay? And now let's look at how the density can be obtained with the mobile sensors. Okay, so let's consider this idea first. Okay, so the question is, can we use GPS on the smartphone for density estimation? That's the question. And here's the ideal situation. Okay, so this is very ideal. So if you assume that all the vehicles are equipped with the smartphones, and if every one of them is willing to report their location, right? So in this case, each vehicle can report its location to the data collection center, right? And then the data collection center will know exactly how many vehicles are there on the section, right? And therefore, the density can be estimated, right? However, this idea is based on the assumption that all of the vehicles has to be equipped with a smartphone, right? And that all of them must be willing to share their location, right? But in reality, we cannot make this assumption, right? Because in reality, some of the vehicles might not be equipped with the smartphones, or maybe they have the smartphones, but they are not willing to share their location, right? So we cannot make an assumption that all of the vehicles would be willing to share the locations. So this solution is not likely to work in practice, right? So what we need to do is to come up with a better way, or actually a more clever way to estimate the density, right? Let's see how we can do this. So instead of counting, we can look at the space between the vehicles instead, right? So as you can see, let's say in the top figure, right? So in the top figure, in this case, the traffic is light, right? It's not dense. So in this situation, the vehicles will be sort of spread out, right? Or basically, the average space between the vehicles would be large in this case, right? So if you have a low density situation, then the average space between the vehicles would be large. But on the other hand, when the traffic is dense, as shown in the bottom figure, then in this case, the space between vehicles would be really small, right? Because they are really tight, right? So basically, we can estimate the density, right, from the average space between the vehicles. And according to the traffic theory, density could be measured from the mean of the space headway. And in fact, density is equal to 1 over the mean of the space headway. Okay, so what is the space headway, right? Well, a space headway is defined as the distance between the same points measured on two successive vehicles. So, for example, the headway can be measured from the rear bumper of the blue car to the rear bumper of the black car, as shown in this figure here. Okay, so the distance, the space headway in this case would be the distance between the rear bumper of the blue car to the rear bumper of the black car, right? And it is equal to the length of the blue car plus the clearance between the blue car and the black car. Okay. So to find density, we can let the mobile sensor measure its headway, right? And then it can send the headway to the data collection center, and the data collection center can figure out what the mean of the space headway would be, right? And then compute the density. And here's how it's going to work in practice. So in this case, each sensing vehicle will be equipped with a smartphone. Right? Not all the vehicles have to be equipped, right? Just any cars that have the smartphone. Right? And so in this case, each sensing vehicle will be equipped with a smartphone, and each sensing vehicle will take an image or a snapshot of the road in front of it, right? Periodically. For example, maybe every 5 minutes. And then it is going to estimate the clearance and the headway from that image, right? Just to figure out how far it is from the front vehicle, right? And each sensing vehicle can then send the headway data to the data collection center, right? And then the data collection center can compute the mean of the space headway that it collects from multiple sensing vehicles, right? Just to compute the mean, right? And then it can use the mean of the space headway to estimate the density. Right? And here is a little bit more details on how we estimate the clearance. So first, we transform the original perspective image into a bird eye view image with a technique called inverse perspective mapping. We do this so that it is easier to estimate the clearance. And you can observe that the lane markings, which appear converging in the perspective image, becomes parallel, right, in the inverse perspective image in the middle, right? And from here, we can run an algorithm to detect the vehicle in front of it, right? And we did an experiment to test the accuracy of the clearance estimation method that we have. And in our experiment, we collect about 480 image samples. And then we run our clearance estimation algorithm to estimate the clearance in each image. And we found that our approach is sufficiently accurate. The mean absolute errors are actually within 10% of the actual reference value. So this is pretty good. So for example, if the actual clearance is 10 meter, then the mean absolute error that we get in this case is only around 0.83 meter, which is pretty small. Okay, I do not have time to go into the estimation algorithm, but if you are interested, you can check out our journal paper, which is given in the bottom of the screen here, right? All right. So that's how you estimate the density with the mobile sensors. Okay. Now let's see how you can estimate the flow, okay, with the fixed sensors. And again, flow measures the number of vehicles that passes through an observation point per unit of time, right? And if you use a fixed sensor, you can determine the flow pretty easily, right? Just like what we discussed before, right? So for example, if you use the loop detectors, or if you use the camera, right, you can count how many vehicles passes through the sensor, right, over time, and that will automatically give you the flow, right? So the bottom line is it is pretty easy, right, to figure out what the flow is with the fixed sensors. But when you have mobile sensors, then it becomes very challenging, right? So for example, let's look at this example. To determine the flow, right, you need to be able to figure out how many vehicles passes through the, let's say, the red line, right, over time, right? So the question is, how would you count the number of vehicles that cross the red line with the mobile sensors, right? And there are a few possible options, but I think one option would be to determine it from the time headway. But frankly, I still do not have a solid solution for this yet. And I think it would make a great research problem. So if you, for example, can figure out a way or a clever way, right, to count the number of vehicles that passes through a cross section, right, with let's say the mobile sensors, then I think you can publish it. Okay, so that's the idea. All right. All right, so we have talked about how to obtain the macroscopic traffic information, right? We have talked about how we can obtain the speed, the flow, and the density, right, with the fixed sensors and also with the mobile sensors. Now let's look at the microscopic traffic information, which is the information at of an individual vehicle, right? And particularly, I would like to talk about the maneuvering information, such as turns, U-turns, and lane changes that a driver makes during a drive. Right? So these are the microscopic traffic information. And why are these data important, right? Why do we need to know this data? Well, the maneuvering activity in combination with other data can be used to assess the driving behavior of a driver, right? So for example, an aggressive driver would tend to change lanes a lot more frequently than a safe driver, right? Because he has to pass every single car in front of him, right? So based on the maneuvering record, you can tell whether the driver is a risky driver or is he a safe driver, right? And one application of this would be to use the maneuvering record for example, license renewal, right? So if a driver has a bad record, then perhaps you can consider not renewing his license, right? And another example application of this would be the insurance application, right? So in this case, an insurance company could use the maneuvering record to assess how risky the driver is, right? So that it can charge high premiums for the risky drivers, and it can charge a lower premium for the safe driver, right? So it makes sense to be able to detect the maneuvering activity, right? Now, how do we detect these maneuvering activities with a smartphone, right? So for turns and U-turns, these are not difficult to detect, especially with the GPS, right? So for example, based on a GPS trace, you can easily detect the turn and the U-turn, right? So if you see from the GPS trace that the direction of the car has changed by, let's say, 90 degrees, right? Then this would mean that it is making a turn, right? And if you see from a GPS trace that the direction of the car has changed by 180 degrees, then in this case, you can tell pretty much easily that it is making a U-turn, right? So turn and U-turns are not difficult to detect, right, with the GPS. But the lane change is not so easy to detect with the GPS, right? To be able to detect the lane change activity with GPS, you would probably need to have a lane level precision map so that you can identify which lane the vehicle is on, right? And whether it has switched to a new lane, right? But the lane level precision map is not so easy to get, right? So GPS might not be the way to go here, right, to detect the lane change. And using a camera to detect a lane change can also be a problem because to detect the lane change, you must be able to see the lane markings, right, so that you know when the vehicle switched lane, right? But in many situations, the lane markings cannot be detected with the camera, right? So for example, if the lane markings are faded or if they are occluded by some objects, right? So for example, if the road is covered with, let's say, snow or fog or rain, then you cannot detect the lane markings with the camera, right? So we need to figure out a better way to detect the lane change with perhaps other sensors on the phone, right? And here are our approaches to detect the lane change with other sensors on the mobile phone. And we have experimented with 2 different approaches. So the first one is the steering wheel based approach. And in this case, we are going to track the pattern of steering wheel rotation that corresponds to the lane change. And the sensor used in this approach is the accelerometer. And the phone, so in this case, the phone must be placed on the steering wheel, okay, because we want to track the rotation of the steering wheel, right? So this is our first approach. And we have also tried another approach, which rely on the tracking of the vehicle heading. So in the second approach, we are going to track the pattern of change in the vehicle heading that correspond to the lane change. And the sensor used in this approach is the magnetometer or the digital compass on the phone, okay? And in this approach, the phone can be placed in any position or in any orientation. So it is actually more flexible than the first approach, okay? So let's see how this approach work. So in the steering wheel based approach, this is how we do it. So basically we place the smartphone on the steering wheel, and then we use the accelerometer on the phone to measure the steering wheel angle, okay? So when the steering wheel is rotated to the left, the angle will increase. And when it is rotated to the right, the angle will decrease. And an example of the steering wheel angle is shown in this picture here, okay? This is the steering wheel angle during a drive, okay? So it looks something like this. So to detect the lane change, we need to detect the signal pattern that corresponds to the lane change from the steering wheel angle, right? And this is what the steering wheel pattern looks like during a lane change. So basically, it kind of looks like a sinusoid. And to detect a lane change, we need to detect this pattern in the steering wheel angle, okay? And in our approach, we built a hidden Markov model, or HMM, to detect this pattern of the lane change. And it turns out that our detection model performs pretty well. We have got about 90% for precision and 93% for recall, which is pretty good. I do not have the time to go into the details of the detection algorithm, but if you are interested, you can check out our journal paper, which is given at the bottom of the screen, okay? All right, so that's one way to do it, is to track the signal, right, of the steering wheel angle. Now let's look at another approach. So in this approach, we use the magnetometer or the digital compass on the phone to detect the heading angle of the vehicle, okay? And an example of the heading angle is shown in this figure here, okay? So we can see that there are many events shown in this figure. And let's see, so there are a few lane change activities, right? And there's one left turn and there's one U-turn, right? So as you can see, the left turn, or actually, or also the right turn. So, but we have the left turn here. So you can see that the turn and the U-turns are pretty easy to detect with the digital compass, right? Because the difference between the initial heading and the final heading is huge, right? For example, in the case of the U-turn, we see that there are 180-degree difference between the initial heading and the final heading. So U-turn and turn in general are pretty easy to detect with the digital compass. But the lane change are more challenging to detect, right? So what we need to do is to identify the pattern in the heading angle that corresponds to the lane change maneuvering, okay? And here's what the heading pattern during a lane change looks like. So it typically looks like a bell-shaped curve. And to detect a lane change, we need to detect this pattern, okay? And in our approach, we come up with a simple rule-based detection algorithm to detect this pattern. And the performance of this approach is also pretty good. We have got about 87%, both for precision and recall, which is a pretty good number in comparison to other methods out there. Okay, and so I would not have the time to go into the details of the algorithm, but if you are interested to learn more, you can check out our journal paper, which is given at the bottom of the screen here. Okay, all right. So these are the ways to detect the maneuvering activity, right, with the mobile sensors or with the smartphones. Right? All right. Okay, so to summarize, in this talk, I have shown you how the traffic information is acquired with the fixed sensing approach in the current system, right? And we learned that fixed sensing has limitations in terms of cost and coverage. And we learned that mobile sensing is more appealing, but it also comes with many new challenges, right? So first, the sensors are now mobile and they are distributed, right? And we also need to come up with new algorithms for processing and estimating the traffic information from the new types of data that the mobile sensors collected, right? And finally, using smartphones is a great way to turn any vehicle into a mobile traffic sensor, right? So basically, you can actually turn millions of ordinary vehicles into the mobile traffic sensors right away, right? Which I think is a pretty neat idea. Okay. All right. So I guess that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that we all learned something new today. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Sooksan, for an amazing and thoughtful presentation. Please give another round of applause for our amazing speaker. Now, we have come to the Q&A session. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat. And for those who are watching from Facebook, please type your questions in the comments. And now we're going to start with our first question, Dr. Sooksan.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
All right, this is from Matt. How would we distinguish 4 cars driving closely to each other and a car with 4 people, each with 1 phone?
Oh, okay. How would we distinguish 4 cars driving closely to each other and a car with 4 people, each with 1 phone? Oh, that's an interesting question. Okay, so if there are 4 cars, right, driving closely, I suppose that with the level of the precision of the GPS today, I think you would be able to distinguish those 4 positions, right? Because when you actually drive, right, it's not really that close. You have to leave some gap, right, in between the cars. So I think with the precision of the GPS in today's phone, you will be able to distinguish that. But if there are 4 people, right, each of them using and each of them use 4 different phones, right? Then I guess you cannot distinguish them, right? I mean, but when, for example, if you use these phones to send the location information, they will be at maybe a very close location anyway, right? But that's not a problem, right? You have 4 phones transmitting the location, which is the same information to the data collection center. I don't see any problem with that, right? But yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you for the first question.
I hope.
Thank you for the first question. Next is from Mario. How do U-turns influence measuring traffic flow predictions? Because in Thailand, U-turns are common, whereas in many countries, they are not.
Okay, measuring traffic flow predictions. Oh, okay. I think that's a great question. Usually when you have, let's say, a U-turn point, right, during a, I mean, on the road section, right, if you have some U-turn points, then of course it is going to disrupt the flow of the traffic, right? Imagine that you are driving, right, and then there are some cars. For example, you lose at least one lane, right, for the cars that are waiting for the U-turn, right? So obviously, it is going to disrupt the flow of the traffic, right? So the question is, how do U-turns influence measuring traffic flow? Yes. So yeah. So the flow in this case, of course, I think would be the flow rate would be lower in this case in comparison to the case where you do not have the U-turns, right? So yeah, I guess that's my answer. Of course, it would affect the flow.
All right, thank you for your answer, Kap. Now let's move to the next question. With the clearance approach, will visual distortions such as heavy rain, snow, or poor video quality be processed, or will the data will be just written off as unusable in microscopic situations?
Okay, that's a great question. So in the clearance estimation approach, right, what we do is we are trying to detect the car in front of us, right? But in some say severe situation, for example, heavy rain, snow, or poor weather situation, then you might not be able to detect the car in front of you, right, in the image. So in that case, you just need to throw that data away, right, because you cannot use that, right? So it's unusable, yes.
So Mr. Mario said that, so the U-turn lanes are not used or used with a slowness factor.
With a slowness factor, the U-turn lanes are not used or used with a slowness factor. So what I'm saying is that with the U-turn, right, it is going to cause the slowdown in the traffic flow, right? So is that is that answering your question? Or?
All right, Mr. Mario says that answers his question. Now, for my questions, Dr. Sooksan, why are some map applications more accurate than others?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Why are some map applications more accurate than others?
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes. I guess you're asking, for example, maybe some map applications like Google Maps, right? In comparison to maybe some other apps.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So I think it depends on the source of the information that they have. Okay. Because I guess different apps are using different source of information. So when for example, let's say Google Maps, they use different sources of traffic data before they can process and show you, right? So they use historical data and also the real-time data from the mobile sensor, right? So depending on actually also the algorithm, right? Because you need to combine both the historical traffic data and also the data that you get from the mobile to make a prediction, right, on the current situation on the road. So I guess it depends on the source and also the algorithm that they use. So different apps can have different algorithms, right, for estimating the traffic information. So I guess that's why one app is better than the other.
Right. So in order for one company to improve their map accuracy. They need to improve the algorithm and add more details to their map applications, right?
Yes, yeah. Especially the source of the traffic data that they get, right? Because actually this company also buy data from many sources. Right?
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Sooksan. Do we have any questions from Facebook? All right. So that's all of our questions. Can I share my screen, Dr. Sooksan?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you. All right, so that was all of our questions. Thank you for all the questions you have sent.
Okay.
Our university is now open for those who are interested in pursuing higher education to apply for the MS and PhD in Artificial Intelligence and Computer Engineering, or AICE. You can find out more information about the admission process and the requirements on our website, or scan the QR code for the online application. And now we're at the end of our session. Please stay tuned for our next session, where we meet Dr. Shaya Hirancharanwet, a senior officer in Securities and Exchange Commission Thailand and an adjunct faculty member of our CMKL University. Wait until we review the topic on our social media platforms and join us in our next session. On behalf of the CMKL team, I would like to thank Dr. Sooksan Panichpapiboon for being our guest speaker today. Additionally, I would like to thank you all for coming today. Thank you so much for listening and have a great afternoon.